2, 3.
Hello, good morning everybody, and welcome to our latest episode of Topical Talkology.
Well remembered, Andy, how are you?
Yeah, I'm fine, yourself?
Good, very good.
Good. So one of the things we are going to talk about is, as probably many of you are aware, if not all of you, there was a stabbing on London Bridge earlier this week. And it was a basically a terrorist attack for someone who'd actually been in prison, had been let out early, and went on to kill 2 people before he was eventually killed himself. And the question we're going to ask, and I'll ask Theo, is actually, can these people be rehabilitated? Because it happened at an offenders rehabilitation group, didn't it? In Fishmongers Hall.
Well, they've done research on this, and the answer is no, in short. But remember, we are talking in broad brushstrokes here. And why? And we've already had this conversation on the podcast, and it's about changing someone's mind. And if you remember, I said to you once, how many times have you had a conversation with someone, and you know that you're right? You know beyond a shadow of a doubt that you're right and they're wrong, and you know that you're explaining it to them absolutely perfectly, that no reasonable person could disagree with what you're saying, and they still disagree with you. And we discussed that, and we said, well, that's an opinion is emotion based and not logic, and it's very, very hard you can't use your logic circuits to access emotion directly, at least not whilst you're an adult. And so this is the first problem that you're going to have with an extremist, with a terrorist, is that they have a very fixed opinion. Then you have what their opinion actually is. So one is an ethos, an idea, a greater good. So for instance, if they believe in a way of living, in a culture, and if they believe that you are the enemy of that, and not only the enemy of that, but for their own way of life to succeed, they have to destroy yours, then that's unbelievably powerful. Plus, remember, religion itself is the most powerful way of influencing people. In other words, you get whatever it is you want in the next life. So your ultimate glory is nothing to do with instant gratification. You get it in the next life. And all you've got to do is be a good, whatever it is, Muslim, Christian, whatever it is, whatever religion you're following. Yeah, and it's a sense of belonging too. Your brothers, your brethren in this fight.
Yeah, because if you actually look at this guy, he was a British national. He was 28 years old, and apparently he actually left school with no qualifications, and he spent many of his late teens in Pakistan. And the thing is, the only purpose he actually really had was actually in his faith, which was Islam, which was a very sort of I wouldn't say manipulated, but very indoctrinated way, particularly when you're going through a level of probably anxiety and lack of purpose in your life. That's where he sought the most comfort, and it was going to be very hard to change, because he had nothing ultimately to live for than actually, in effect, in this case, what was his next life.
So the reason for living, absolutely right, and that's you see, you can't fight dogma with bombs. You can't fight dogma with bombs, and that's why no Western society has ever really thoroughly beaten a heavily religious-based society. It just doesn't happen. Because these people will always... you can't fight with someone who's just instantly willing to die. You can't win a battle against someone who's willing to just be a suicide bomber.
And that's the thing. His life over here was, pretty much crap. And actually, he was in the belief that actually the next life was going to be better for him. So when he had nothing to live for over here, actually, what was the other alternative? to go to paradise, which was to do what he did. Now, he was in prison for 8 years, so that can't have been fun for a start. But secondly, the question is, why do they allow him out early? And actually, if prisons are supposed to be a place of rehabilitation, when you actually put a lot of people who've got the same sort of belief system in a group, that's just going to reinforce it, and they're going to become even more indoctrinated by it.
Well, that's right, and that's the mirror neuron effect. So if you feel persecuted, then it reminds you to become more of what you were before. So therefore, anti-Muslim rhetoric by the West is actually largely responsible for the development of extremist groups.
So the thing is, why do they? Obviously, I know most people serve half their sentence if they actually behave themselves in prison.
You see, it's easy to know what to say. That's the problem you've got. So this gentleman knew what to say, and they let him out. But it's different. Knowing what to say is different from actually genuinely changing. And as we said, where you believe that you are blessed and doing the work of God, and that your ultimate reward is in the next life, and that the West is the ultimate evil and is the threat against that, you're not going to change. Where you can potentially be rehabilitated is where it's not so much the culture and religion that you're fighting for, but a specific objective. So, for instance, a landmass or moving of borders. So, for instance, two well-known terrorists who were apparently rehabilitated were Nelson Mandela and Martin McGuinness, as two obvious examples. But the point to make there is that they were fighting for a specific objective, and they were incredibly intelligent people, and therefore they worked out that the only way to really fight for that objective is to follow the rules of the system that you're in.
Well, I think I believe even Nelson Mandela, and I may stand corrected, but I believe he was already a qualified lawyer at the time, wasn't he? And probably realised that, and did realise actually. Admittedly, he became more learned when he was actually in prison, didn't he?
Well, that's the thing. You see, the more intelligent you are, the more chance you have of overcoming some of your emotional thinking once you're not in an emotional state. So if you're in an emotional state, if you're angry, if you're very happy, if you're sad, then nobody can think logically. But once you are settled, and of course prison gives you plenty of time to settle, then you have a better chance, the more intelligent you are, of thinking things through and overcoming some of your emotional beliefs.
But and it's mainly cause and effect, isn't it? In this guy's case, he saw that his life, as I said, his life was pretty crap, and particularly as I said, in prison, and he saw he believed he was probably even unjustly treated in some ways, and that resentment just grew and grew and grew and grew and grew, and and particularly in prison, you stick to your own anyway. And all you have to do is just put all these people in the same sort of bubble, and what's going to happen? They are, as I said, it's just going to reinforce their belief system, because that's where they found that comfort.
Correct, and it's also it's a lack of education. As you said, he left with no qualifications. A very, very interesting individual who comes across as also a very nice person is Majid Nawaz, the LBC presenter, and he was also a Muslim extremist at one point.
I don't know. Was he? I know he was.
No, he wasn't a terrorist. He wasn't a terrorist, but he was. I could be slightly wrong, but he was certainly a fundamentalist at heart.
Yes.
But he was a fundamentalist at heart.
That's a better way of putting it.
Based on his own direct perception of quite a limited range of life experience. And once he had time to think, and he spent time in a Turkish prison, once he had time to think it through, I mean, he's very, very intelligent. He's figured out that the way to do it is through cooperation and communication and openness and understanding and tolerance. And he's exceptionally good at that. But again, he's another example where he's very, very intelligent.
Yeah, I mean, I heard this. I heard this lady. She spoke in America, and based on the mind, obviously, this is what I saw on YouTube, so I can't sort of clarify exactly. But one thing she did say, that the intelligence agencies will actually say there's probably about 1 billion Muslims in the world right now, and intelligence agencies estimate that between 25 and 30% of them are actually extremists. So they've got quite extreme belief system, which means there's about 300 million people out there who actually want to see the downfall of the West in some ways. Now, let's assume for a moment, hypothetically, that these intelligence agencies have over-exaggerated that, and let's say that there's actually 100 million people. So let's say only just 10%. There's still 100 million people who are very much anti-Western civilization in some ways, which is a bit of a concern, because obviously you can't actually monitor everybody out there. Now let's say just 10% of that 100 million are willing to do something about it. That's 10 million people who are out there who are willing to go and do something to an extreme. And obviously ISIS came up, but they didn't really, that they were beaten down. But if everyone actually followed what they really actually wanted to do, actually there's a bit of a problem on our hands. Now,
yes.
But the thing is, not every Muslim is an extremist or actually wants to see that, because I mean, if you look at something like Germany, for example, not everybody who fought for Germany was a Nazi. Not everybody who killed all those people in China were extremists. So when you look at all the millions of people, it's only done by a very few people who are actually giving action, but actually are very influential and actually selling their vision of what potentially be, hence going to paradise in this particular case. So if you actually look at those stats in some ways, do people have a right to be concerned? And when you actually use people say, oh, you're Islamophobic, and the thing is, deep in your subconscious mind, if you know someone or a Muslim who looks very much like a jihad, for example, there are going to be certain things deeply embedded in your amygdala that are going to actually say, actually, I've got a cause for concern here, well, regardless of whether they're fundamentalists or not.
Yeah, I mean, humans are always capable of pretty much anything, because humans really move at random. They need to be led, and the most effective way of leading humans is religion. There is also a quite an interesting book called Ordinary Men. Now, I haven't read it, but I've read about it. And Ordinary Men is based on what happened with Polish soldiers at the beginning of the Second World War. They weren't soldiers; they were policemen. And what happened is, when the Second World War started, the captain of the police went to his men, and he said, "Listen." And most of these men were quite mature men. They were fairly well educated, and he said to them, "I understand that you may want to leave now, and I won't hold it against you. But you're probably going to be asked to do things that you never imagined in your wildest nightmares that you would ever have done. And of course, it was because they were asked to cooperate by the Germans in control of the Jews at the time. And sure enough, these men, who were not men who were necessarily easily led, who had experience and a certain level of maturity, they ended up doing the most awful, offensive atrocities. And so this book, Ordinary Men, shows you that under certain circumstances, anybody is able to do pretty much anything to anyone. And that's the huge difficulty of it. And then of course there was another book. There's another book by Alex.